English teacher and have been supporting schools and teachers and students in ed tech since 2016. Kristen Stout comes to us from Dallas Middle School in Dallas, Pennsylvania. Ms. Stout has been teaching for 22 years and is currently pursuing her master's in online learning. She teaches regular and honors ELA, 7th and 8th grade gifted, and cyber for 7th through 9th grade. Ms. Stout has worked with Study.com for 3 years and has developed an approach to keep her students engaged and actively learning while using Study.com. We are so pleased to have her with us today to share her expertise and examples. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks for having me, Charlotte.
So we are going to stop sharing our screen so that we can dive into the questions. So my first question for you is, how did you find Study and what was appealing to you about our content?
Well, I found Study.com several years ago when I was scouring the internet for good videos for my classes. And every time I would find that one amazing video, it would pause and say Study.com, sign in. And then coincidentally, my son was also using Study.com for his high school English class, and he really liked it. I decided to really dive into it when school shut down in March of 2020. I signed up for the free trial for the month of April, and then I enjoyed it so much, and my students enjoyed it, and so I decided to pay for just the monthly trial for May. And then in the following fall, my principal paid for a subscription for me. And so I would say about 3 years ago is when I really got started with it.
So it's interesting that your son was using it as well. And what strikes me as a parent of 3 teenagers, I'm surprised he shared with you what he was doing in class and that he had this tool. So how did that come about?
It came about because he really liked the way his teacher assigned it. Now, she has a different way of assigning than I do, and I don't think he would like my way, but he really liked her way because of the way she created options. There's so many options with Study.com for how you use it and how you assign it. And it was just occasionally he'd say, oh, I have to do a Study.com. And he's not the kind of guy who would tell me what he was doing. So I do think it stands out that he said, oh, I have to do a Study.com. And when I said, hey, you know, how are you doing this? And he'd be like, oh, no, don't worry, Mom, I've got this.
I love that. That's a great story. So we're talking about today a little bit about engaging students and keeping them active. So how do you use Study.com to structure your class time?
So I'm a really big believer on being prepared the first weeks of school, learning routine, learning how we do things, like this is who we are and this is what we do. So in the beginning of the school year, I build routine. So before I even assign a Study.com assignment, I will model in the classroom at least once or twice. So for example, last week, I showed a video. I explained to them my students ahead of time, like what the patterns are of the videos. And then we did a quiz together. And so the next day, then I reminded them, hey, remember Study.com videos, they always have a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's going to start out with something to draw you in. You can look and see how long the videos are if you wish. I talked to them about watching it to the very end, not stopping it early. And then again, we do a quiz together, and then I assign a quiz to them just to give them practice. And last week we had a really great example where I wasn't paying attention. I misclicked. And I said, okay, kids, this is a great example for this is what you do under these circumstances. So I really begin my year by modeling exactly what to expect in a Study.com assignment, and also really active viewing. I put some things into place to make sure that they are actively viewing, but I think just being aware of the patterns. Like I will specifically say to students, you know, when you get to the end of the video, you're going to hear that do-do-do-do-do sound, and that tells you the review is coming, and you should really focus back in if your mind has drawn away from it.
So it becomes a part of the daily class routine. You're modeling it to them just 2 times, and then they seem to be comfortable with it?
Really, I think that's all it takes. I must say that last year I used Study.com with a group of asynchronous students, and I met with them one time and just kind of gave them some guidelines. Those are high achieving students, and they did not need the modeling. They kind of knew exactly what to do. But I would say when you have a class, like a heterogeneous group, or if you're using it for any kind of remediation, I think the more modeling you can do, the better. And I think that goes for just about anything we do in the classroom. The more modeling, the better.
And you have them, when you're doing that modeling, you're having them go directly to their own computers and do the quiz the first time on their own, and you're kind of you're able to oversee that and help them through it.
Yeah. In my classroom, I always have, they have Chromebooks. I say Chromebooks closed whenever I want them to focus on the board and things that I'm showing them. And then, so I would model it first and then say, okay, everybody open up your Chromebooks, practice following the link, go here. And then I can either walk around the room, which I often do, or I'm fortunate enough that I can see all their screens on my computer too.
Okay.
Just by walking around.
So you're keeping them accountable. And I know you mentioned the quizzes and the video watching. So how do you manage that in your gradebook? What are you giving them credit for? And what do they know they're going to be held accountable for?
Sure. So I'm using a slightly different structure this year point-wise than I did last year. But I think whatever point structure you use can work under this scenario. For my students to get a score, they have to watch the video to the end. Study's really nice in that it lets you know if students have only visited it. So if they open it up and they play the video for 30 seconds, that it will tell me they just visited. In some lessons, it's a reading page. If they don't read it, like if they're not on the page long enough to have read it, Study.com tells me they weren't there long enough. So I tell my students, you must watch the video to the end. You must be on that reading page long enough to actually have read it. Now, we cannot control what our students are doing. They could be sitting right in front of us, and we cannot control that they are actively, fully engaged, no matter what we do. In anything, I think at any time, we can get a sense, but I've had students look at me and I know that they're not paying attention to me. So what I do to ensure that they are engaging as much as possible is, so first of all, they have to do the reading page to the end, or they have to watch the video to the end. And then when they take the quiz, I allow redos, but they only may have 3 total attempts before I take off points. So they don't get a complete score if they stop the video early or don't stay on the page long enough, and they don't get a complete score if it takes them more than 3 attempts. Now, if you have students with IEPs, you can provide an accommodation and allow those students more retakes. But I explained to them, if you are paying attention to the video, you should be able to get it, maybe if not on your first try, then on your second try, and then definitely by your third. And Study.com offers wonderful scaffolding if they get an answer incorrect. So if they get it wrong the first time, they really should be looking at what Study.com offers them to get it right the third time. So that has been, I think, a really big improvement. When I first started using Study.com, they could take the quiz as many times as they want to. And then after a while, they become so accustomed to the questions, eventually they're going to get it right. This ensures that they at least give the video somewhat of an attention because they only have so many tries.
I understand. So there's always 5 questions in each one. So you're kind of figured it out that if they get more than 3 tries, it's by the elimination, right? They'll know which one is the right answer. Is that why you've chosen 3?
Well, and I think so. And, a couple of years ago, we had some crafty students. Students will always find their way around a problem. So they would randomly click. So they would just randomly click. And if you randomly click, eventually you're going to get correct answers. And so I wanted to kind of steer them away from that. I just really believe in almost every case, if I have rarely seen a student who could not get it on the 3rd try. Yeah. I just have rarely seen that. I think the questions are fair questions. The answers are logical. They're not always easy. Sometimes they're extremely doable. They're not always easy, but I think if they put in the time, if they watch the video, if they don't get it that first time around, and they use what Study.com offers for those incorrect answers, they should definitely be able to get it by the 3rd try.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're talking a little bit about engaged and active learning. So what kind of strategies do you use to keep your students engaged and actively learning? And I know from our introduction that you work with regular English, you work with some gifted kids, you're working with kids in a cyber environment. So do you have different approaches that you use for the different kinds of students you're teaching?
Definitely. And that I feel like I should be a salesperson for Study.com because I just feel like it's so versatile. You don't have to, you could get as much out of Study.com as I do and use it completely differently. So I use Study.com with my honors group. It's the first year I'm teaching it, and I'm using it to do a flipped classroom. So for example, this past week, I created a Study.com course. Students had to, for today, watch 7 videos, take the quizzes, do notes on it. And then today they're working together to create some Google slides that they're all going to share. Each group had a different video to put together. And then they're going to basically construct a presentation. The course was on reading strategies. So they're going to construct a Google slide presentation based on what they watched in Google Classroom. So I do use it to flip classes. In my regular ed classes, I can't always guarantee that those students are going to do the homework. And I think that that is a big concern that people have with flip classroom. So I do kind of what's called considered a faux flip, where time in my class is very like malleable. There are days where I'll give students half a period to work independently on a number of various assignments, different kinds of assignments. Some days they might have an entire period to work on it where they have 5 or 6 tasks to do. And oftentimes in that kind of malleable time, that's when I'm doing the flip. They're going to watch a Study.com video that's kind of cold. And then maybe in a day or so, I'm going to say, hey, remember that study video that you watched? Now we're going to pick up on that. So I use it for flipping my classroom, for faux flipping. I use it to augment my lesson plans. Like sometimes I'll just flat out show a video and we'll do the quiz together. I'll say, now you do the quiz. And this year I'm dabbling into using it also for enrichment and acceleration, asking students what they're interested in learning about, and then assigning them videos. So those are some of the ways that I use it for my students.
So I'm hearing a little bit of description of like differentiation. So you're using it for enrichment. Do you ever assign, look through the content and assign different levels of work to either groups of students or classes of students?
I don't tend to assign to individual students, but this is what I do. And you can do that. One of the things that I really like about Study.com is for every topic, there are so many videos and they come at so many different levels. So if I'm just introducing a topic that I think either students might not have ever heard of before, or they could be very rusty, I'll often go to the videos that are meant for elementary school. And you can tell they're meant for elementary school because often it will say for kids after it. I don't feel like they have a juvenile kind of vibe about them at all. They just tend to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more basic. So that's the way I will differentiate in terms of thinking about the class of students that's sitting in front of me and where we are in a lesson. But you certainly could find different levels. There's just so many different, and assign, if you're like working with like reading groups in your class or just various groups, you could find one video that might be more appropriate for one group of students and another one at a different level that might be appropriate for another one. There's just so much available to do that if you wanted to do that. Excellent,
thank you. So how has Study.com actually made your job easier to do?
It's first of all, I can't say enough about the content. So one of the things that concerns me, and I was using blended learning strategies in my classroom before COVID. So I was going more towards videos and things like that. On the one hand, it's the content. There's just really, there's never been a case where I've gone to Study.com and not been able to find something that applies directly to what I'm teaching. So it's the content on the one hand. And on the other hand, it allows me to be able to give a consistent message to my students. So rather than standing at a PowerPoint presentation, they can watch a Study.com video. So it doesn't matter whether I'm in school or whether I have a substitute, whether I'm having a good day or a bad day, whether it's second period and I'm feeling fresh, or whether it's sixth period and I'm feeling exhausted, whether the student is in class, they get a consistent message. And that to me is really important, like that consistency among my classes. the ease of finding the content. We don't use the textbook anymore in our school for English in 8th grade. So not having a textbook, being able to augment with like the best of what's out there right now. And then just on the back end, as you know, we've talked just the back end, the data that I get is just getting better and better all the time. The interface with Google Classroom, the data that I receive is just very, just so useful and helpful. So I can really dig into that data and it tells me exactly what I need to know. I can look at the number of tries and I can differentiate, okay, who are my students who, maybe need a little help just by the number of times they took, they took the quiz. I can see data like that. So I guess those 3 areas, the content, that consistent message, and then the data on the back end, and the ease, just the ease of use and assigning. More than any other, really more than any other kind of video service I use, and I do use several, you just can't get past that content. And it's always going to be appropriate too. That's another thing that's really important to me, always appropriate.
That's great. I had a question come in when you mentioned Google Classroom. Was it hard to integrate your classroom with Study.com?
It was incredibly easy. One little kind of bugaboo that my colleague and I worked out, I give my Google Classrooms unique names. So I always put the school year after it. My colleague does not. And so when she tried to import her Google Classroom, because she had same names this year and last year, it tried to pull in too many students and it wouldn't allow her to do it. And I said, you need to change the name of this year's class. And it was, so because of that, that made it like, okay, it was like a few minute, sidetrack for me. They just come right in, they populate right away. If you have a student who's not in your Google Classroom at the time, you just resync it. This is the first year I'm using the integration. I don't use Google Classroom. I don't grade Study.com in Google Classroom, but I love that it pulls over and lets them know, like it'll pull over a 100 for them. So that's really nice that they can see, okay, I got a 100 on it. I don't need to retake that quiz. But yeah, the integration is super easy.
I love that. Let's see. We are speaking to educators and administrators who are considering using Study.com. So what kind of suggestions do you have to them as they're considering using it, or maybe they've just started using it?
I would say with Study.com, as well as any other web-based app you're using, never assign anything without doing it yourself. Watch the video all the way through. There are sometimes I have differences of opinions. And so I think it's worthwhile presenting though differences of opinion. So I'll show students, if I hadn't watched it ahead of time, then I wouldn't know that was there. And always do the quizzes yourself, because you need to know where there might be something that could be confusing or difficult for your students. So never just be like, oh, this looks good, and assign it without doing it yourself. With every web-based app, I think that is extremely important. I think really also take the time to look at everything that Study.com has. One year I'm in Pennsylvania, and we have to do the years were not observed, we have to do a self-directed project. So one year for my self-directed project, I did all of like the course that Study.com has for teachers. I watched every video, I read every reading page, and that really helped me to learn a lot more about how to use it, like how to use the product. So I thought that was incredibly helpful too.
I think that you bring up a great point. Often people really focus on the video content or the micro learning content, but they're not looking at all the resources that we have available for teachers, like lesson plans and professional development and how to teach online, all those things.
There's so much there for teachers, for students, for parents. There's a lot of, I linked a page on my website for parents so that they could read more about what their children were doing at Study.com. It's just so, you can't let it overwhelm you. And it's so nicely organized that you really should, like, if you have Study.com, you should look at everything that it has to offer. It's worth it to really look into it.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. Some more questions that are coming in. So one person wants to just know, typically, how many students do you have in each of your classes?
I'm very fortunate. I have low numbers. This year, I'm so lucky. I have a class in my honors class. I have one honors class with 17. I have another one with 21. I have another class that is 22. Normally, our classes aren't that small. This 8th grade class is just a smaller class. Next year, the class is larger. So our typical size is usually somewhere between like 21 and 24, 25. We're very fortunate to have small classes.
Excellent. Another question that came in is, you've talked a little bit about the video lessons, but is there also a way for students to practice those skills? And it's actually a question for me, because you haven't used our skills yet, but we do have a new interface where students can practice. They can master topics. So you can show the micro video and then they can go off into the skills and do application and mastery of it. So that's just something that is rather new. And we did a webinar on that 2 weeks ago. So if you go back to our landing page, you can watch that. So as we move forward, we have a little bit of time for questions. So I'm just gonna ask the audience, if you have any more questions, to post them now. And I'll go back to sharing my screen. So any other questions that we have from the audience, we'd be happy to answer those. I have one question that just came in. How do you use Study.com to help support students who might be missing class due to, having to leave for COVID or, snow days? Are there ways that you're using Study.com to support those students who are not in the classroom?
100%. And so this is why it's so important to create your, to really model in the beginning of the year what you expect when they're doing assignments, so that they know exactly what you want them to do, how you want them to do it, and how they're going to get there. Right now, I'm receiving, I probably have had already, we've been open for a little over about 2 weeks now. Yeah, about 2 weeks now we've been open, and I've probably already had 10 kids with COVID. So right now, I think I have 5 kids out. The Study.com links are posted in the Google Classroom, and they're just going right ahead and doing them as they are feeling well. Like well enough to do them. In Pennsylvania, we have flexible instruction days on snow days. So oftentimes if I know I want to assign a Study.com, I watch the weather, and then that's the day I would assign one. Absolutely it worked. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about it, that these students who are missing a week, they're at least able to go in and do their Study.com assignments.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
We have another question. In addition to data, are students themselves reporting to you whether they like Study.com? Do they find it engaging?
I think they do. I think that students, I mean, there are going to be students who don't like anything you do. I have to say, I just assigned my honors students. They had about a week, and I did give them some class time to complete 9 of them. And I thought about that. I reflected a little afterwards, and I thought, okay, am I going to make them? That's a lot. That might be too much. There was a reason I wanted them to do that. And I thought maybe, like, am I going to make them not like this because, like, was that overkill in the beginning of the year? But for the most part, I think they do like the videos because they are so to the point. I try not to show videos that are more than 5 minutes long. And I broke that rule because I did assign some longer ones this time. But I think what they like about them is that they are short and to the point and very straightforward. Visually, they're pleasing. So I think you're going to have students who there are things they don't like at all. I would say, there are some great YouTube videos out there, but I know the consistency of what I'm going to see on a Study.com, they're going to find it as appealing as a student could possibly find, something appealing that they do in class.
I was going to say, as appealing as they can find homework and classwork, right?
Right.
And I think a follow-up to that is, have you seen an increase in student grades and outcomes since beginning to use Study.com?
Definitely. Definitely. I haven't done any kind of like action research on like what were their grades, you know, when I do a like Google Slides or a PowerPoint versus watching a study.com video. And maybe that's coming because I have to do a action research project for the class that I'm doing. Maybe that's something that I should do. So I don't have any hard data to prove it, only just a sense. I think what it's doing is it's activating prior knowledge in the way I'm using it. And I think whenever you do that, you're going to improve success because you're bringing all of your students to kind of the same place. Like they all might come in with, if I'm showing something on figurative language, they all might come in with different ideas about what figurative language is. But if they watched a study.com video, you've kind of like narrowed that gap. And I think when you activate prior knowledge or build that, they're always going to be more successful. So I don't have hard data to prove it, but just through my observations, I do believe they are more. And my colleagues and I in my department, we are all using it.
That's great to hear. Well, if you do that project, we'd love to hear what your results are. And this might be more for me, but I'll ask it to you anyway. Does Study.com provide social emotional learning resources? Is this something that you've explored at all?
I think I did a video, like I've done videos on growth mindset. It definitely has to be there. I cannot imagine, I've never looked at look for a topic and not found it there. So I would be willing to bet that, Charlotte, you're going to say, sure we do.
We sure do. So, and what I love about it is it's exactly the way you describe it. It can be applied to your current courses, so you can find social emotional learning lessons that tie into what you're doing in your classroom, for instance, that growth mindset, or you can find very specialized social emotional learning lessons that you can assign in a counseling setting or, you know, in a much more focused, specialized life skills learning setting. So we definitely have that available too. I don't see any other questions coming in, so we're going to take the last few minutes that we have and just tell you a little bit more about our series. We have our next episode will be on October 12th. Behind the science behind microlearning, you've heard today how well it works. Let's figure out exactly what it is that we do, what students are experiencing when they are learning through micro lessons. So that'll be October 12th. You can go to our landing page and register for that. If you're already using Study.com and you need some support, our customer success managers are available. If you just take your phone and click on the QR code, it will bring you to their landing page with contact information, office hours, and resources that you can use in your classroom today. And if you're on social media, you can find out what's happening at Study.com, what's new on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram. We have competitions going on all year long for teachers. So back to school, we had lots of great little competitions. So if you're on social media, you'll be able to participate in those as well. So we appreciate you attending today. Thank you so much. And we hope that you'll visit us with our next webinar. We will be updating our webinar offerings throughout the year and finding topics that are relevant to you. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. It was truly wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.